Eleanor had not expected to be met at the cottage. She had expected a lockbox, an emailed code, the small, modern courtesy of a stranger handing her a rental at arm's length. Instead, there was a woman on the porch, small, gray-haired, in a heavy gardening coat. She had a brown paper bag in one hand and a key in the other. She was waving as if she and Eleanor were already old friends. "Eleanor Brennan," Margaret said. "You won't remember me. I'm Margaret Hollis. I knew your aunt." "Oh," Eleanor said. She got out of the car. "Oh, yes, I do remember you. A little. You had a yellow lab." "I had 3 yellow labs, in sequence. You probably remember the second one. The first one I had before you came in the summers." Margaret pressed the key into her hand and the bag into her other arm. "I remember you. The summer girl. You were a wild thing in those days, out till all hours. Your aunt used to call me when she couldn't find you." Eleanor laughed, surprised. "I had forgotten. Long time ago." Margaret patted her arm. "Sourdough. Don't argue. It's a welcome present. I made too much. There's milk in the fridge and coffee in the cupboard. My number is on the magnet on the door of it. I won't bother you unless you want to be bothered." "Thank you," Eleanor said. She felt, ridiculously, near tears. "Thank you, Margaret." Margaret patted her arm. "It's a good cottage. You take your time." She went back to her own car, an old Subaru that Eleanor remembered from 40 years ago, or one exactly like it. She drove away down the gravel road. Eleanor stood on the porch with a key in one hand and a bag of bread in the other, and watched the taillights disappear toward town. She let herself in. The cottage was small and clean. It smelled like cedar and old books. The kitchen window faced the water. The bed was made. There was a single white mug upside down on the drying rack, as if the last guest had washed up after themselves and gone. There was a wood stove in the corner, squat and black, with a basket of kindling beside it that Margaret had thought to fill. Eleanor set her bag down. She walked the room slowly, the way you walk through a place you're going to be living in, deciding which corners belonged to you. Then she went into the kitchen. She put the bread on the counter. She opened the cupboard for a mug. She found herself reaching for the second one. Just a reflex, just the hand remembering. She caught it halfway and set it down on the counter, very carefully, the way you'd set down something that might still bite. 18 months, she thought, and I still set the table for 2. She sat down at the small kitchen table in her coat and let the cottage be quiet around her. She had told her daughter Claire she was coming here to clear her head. That was the polite version. But the truth was, she had woken up one morning in October in the house she had lived in for 31 years, and she had realized she could disappear from it and the house would not notice. Her children were grown. Her husband was buried. The dog had died the spring before Bill did. She had been moving through the rooms like a ghost in her own house. Furniture, she had thought, more than once. I have become furniture. One morning over coffee, she had opened her laptop. She had typed "Cottage Rentals, Oregon Coast, November" into a search bar without quite knowing why. 3 weeks later, she was here. Key in her hand, wood stove unlit, purse still on her shoulder. She had been here once before, a long time ago. The summer she was 19. She didn't let herself think about that summer often. There was no point. It had been 42 years. The boy she'd known then was a man now, somewhere. Probably with grandchildren and a wife. A life that had nothing to do with her. And the version of her that he had known, the one who walked the beach barefoot in August and laughed too loud and meant everything she said, that version had also moved on, in her own way. Married a good man, raised 2 good children, become someone's wife and someone's mother, and somewhere along the way, stopped being someone she recognized in the mirror. She got up. She lit the wood stove. The kindling caught on the third match. She watched the small flame find the larger kindling and bloom into something steady. And she thought, just a month. Just a month to be a person nobody is keeping track of. She did not think about the boy. The coffee place was the only one open in town on a Tuesday in November. She had walked there from the cottage, 20 minutes along the bluff road. Hands shoved into her coat pockets, the sea slate gray and the gulls complaining. She pushed the door open, already half deciding what she was going to order. The bell chimed. The man at the counter looked up. The bell was still ringing when Eleanor stopped walking. He knew her first. She saw it cross his face, the small, startled rearrangement of a person seeing something they had stopped expecting to see. He set the cloth he was holding down on the counter. His mouth opened and then closed. And for a long moment, in the smell of coffee and damp wool and the slow chime of the bell still settling, they just looked at each other. Ellie, he said. Nobody had called her that in 30 years. She put her hands on the doorframe because she needed to put her hand on something. Hank, she said. He laughed, short, surprised, the laugh of a man who had no idea what to do with the moment but knew he was inside it. Then he just shook his head, slowly. Well, he said. Well, look at that. He's still here, she thought. Of course he's still here. The boy who had told her, at 19, that he was never going to leave this town, and meant it, was standing behind the counter of a coffee shop, with gray at his temples, a dish towel in his hand. And the only thing that had changed was everything. She walked back to the cottage in a daze she could not name and would not have admitted to. The wind had come up. The sea was the color of pewter. She unlocked the cottage door and stood in the entryway with her coat still on and said out loud to the empty rooms, "No, not this, not now." She had come here to be alone. She had not come here to be found. She took her coat off. She hung it on the hook. She put the kettle on. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the light go gray over the water. And she made herself a promise, one she was already, even as she made it, beginning to suspect she would not keep. She did not go back to the coffee place the next day. She walked instead. She walked the bluff road south, past the cottages with their windows shuttered for the season and the gardens gone to seed. She walked the long curve of the beach, where the kelp lay in dark ropes at the tide line. She walked back up the wooden stairs that someone had built into the cliff face when she was a child, and that someone, possibly the same someone, was still keeping in repair. She walked until her thighs ached and her cheeks were chapped from the wind. When she got back to the cottage, she ran a hot bath. She lay in it for a long time with her eyes closed and tried not to think about a man behind a coffee counter's face. It did not work, but she gave it a serious try. On the third day, she ran out of milk. There was, of course, exactly one grocery store. She walked there in the late morning when she judged it least likely that anyone would be in it. She was wrong. The place was warm and busy, the small Tuesday morning crowd of retirees and contractors. She had her hand on a carton of half and half when a voice behind her, low and careful, said, "Hi, Ellie." She turned around. He looked exactly like himself. She hadn't been able to name it on Tuesday in the coffee shop, in the chime of the bell and the swimming surprise of her own pulse. He looked, after 42 years, exactly like himself. The hair had gone mostly gray. The shoulders were a little heavier. There were deep lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in 1983. But the face underneath all of it was the face she had memorized one August on a porch in this town, when she was 19. And the body underneath the heavy canvas jacket was holding itself the same way it had held itself then, slightly turned, one shoulder a little forward, as if he were always half listening for something. "Hi," she said. It came out smaller than she had meant it to. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "I saw you from across the store." No, she shook her head. She was aware of the half and half still in her hand. She set it back on the shelf, very carefully, as if she were going to come back for it later. "I'm glad you did." "How long are you here?" he asked. "A month." "A month? Maybe longer," she said, and then heard herself say it, and didn't know where it had come from. He nodded. He did not push. She had forgotten that about him. Or, no, she had remembered that about him. Every time she had let herself remember anything at all. He didn't push. He waited. He gave you the room you needed to say the thing you were going to say. And if you didn't say it, he let you not say it. And he did not make you feel small for the not saying. "You staying somewhere good?" "Margaret's cottage, the blue one out on the bluff." "That's a good cottage. The wood stove draws funny in a north wind, though. Pack the back vent with newspaper. Half pack it. Don't block it all the way." "Okay. And if you want a coffee while you're here, you know where I am." She bought the half and half. She walked back to the cottage. She put the kettle on. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the light go gray over the water. She looked down at her left hand on the windowsill. She had taken the ring off in September. The pale band around her finger was almost gone now. Almost, but not quite. She thought about the newspaper trick. About how he had told her, without her asking, the way you tell someone a small, useful thing because you have noticed them, and you would like their life to be slightly easier in a small way. Nobody had treated her like that in a long time. Bill had stopped offering that somewhere around year 10, when he'd decided she was capable of managing the house and had stopped noticing what managing it required. The small, useful things had quietly become her job. All of them. She did go back to the coffee place. She went the next morning, because she had promised herself she wouldn't. And one of the things she was learning, late, was that promises she made to herself in defensive moments were the ones most worth breaking. She pushed the door open. The bell chimed. He looked up from the espresso machine. He didn't smile exactly, but his whole face settled. The way a man's face settles when something he had been quietly bracing for turns out to be all right. "Morning," he said. "Morning. What can I get you?" She had been a coffee with cream woman for 36 years, because that was how Bill drank his coffee. And it had been easier, somewhere around year 8, to just make one pot the same way. She opened her mouth to order it. What came out was, "A cortado, please." She had not had a cortado in 40 years. He didn't react. He just nodded, and he made it, and he set it in front of her in a small white cup. And he said, "You used to order these in the summer, at Donatello's, the little place by the marina with the blue awning. You remember that." He shrugged, a small lift of one shoulder, and went back to wiping down the steamer wand. She sat at the counter. She drank her cortado. He moved around the small space, restocking cups, exchanging 2 words with an old man who came in for a drip coffee and a paper. He did not crowd her. He did not perform. After a while, when the old man had left and the place was empty again, he leaned on the counter on his elbows across from her and said, "You staying warm out at Margaret's?" "I am." "The newspaper trick worked?" "It did." "Good." He tapped the counter once, lightly. "I'm glad you came back in." That was all. He went back to wiping down the steamer wand. She finished her cortado. She walked back to the cottage along the bluff road. The wind was coming off the water hard. She pulled her scarf up over her chin, and she thought, I'm glad you came back in. She thought about it all afternoon. Margaret came by the cottage the next afternoon with another bag of bread. She didn't stay long. She was on her way somewhere. But she stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame, smiling. Been into the coffee shop yet? Eleanor's face went warm. A little. Margaret nodded slowly. I remember that summer. A little. You and the Holloway boy. She smiled wider, the small, pleased smile of a woman enjoying herself. He owns a lot of things now. His father bought up half of Main Street in the 60s, when the canneries closed and nobody else wanted it. Hank took it over when his dad got sick. He runs the boatworks himself, mostly. The other places he just keeps open. He says the town needs them, so... Margaret, he's also alone, Eleanor. I'm not pushing anything. I'm just telling you. In case you wanted to know. I didn't ask. No, Margaret agreed. You didn't. She left. Eleanor stood in the doorway with the bag of warm bread and watched her walk back down the gravel road. She did not eat any of it that night. She set it on the kitchen counter. She lit the wood stove. She sat in front of the fire with a glass of wine. And she thought about Hank Holloway, leaning on a counter on his elbows and saying, I'm glad you came back in. And she thought about a 40-year-old sign she hadn't seen yet that she now knew was waiting for her on the south end of town. And she thought, he's been here the whole time. It was such a simple thought. The boatworks was on the south end of town, in a long, low building of weathered cedar with a green metal roof. She passed it on a walk that Friday and stopped to look. The big sliding door was open. Inside, in the dim, she could see the shape of a hull on sawhorses, and a man, not Hank, somebody younger, bent over it with a sander. The sign over the door said Holloway and Son. The paint was old. The "and Son" had been there a long time. A smaller, hand-painted board hung below it. Boats, repairs, summer kayak rentals, inquire within. She stood there for a long minute. Then she walked on. The first time he touched her was on a Sunday. She had gone down to the boatworks in the afternoon because the small board under the sign had said something about kayak rentals, in the summer and sometimes in the off-season, if you asked nicely. It was not kayak weather. Eleanor knew that. She went anyway, because she had been telling herself for 3 days that she would, and she had been finding reasons not to. And she had finally gotten tired of her own reasons. He was in the boatworks alone. The younger man with the sander was gone. A small space heater hummed in the corner. The air smelled like varnish and sawdust and the sea coming in through the open door. Hank straightened up when he saw her. He set down the rag he was holding. Hi, he said. Hi. You came to look at the boats. I came to ask about a kayak. The sign says you rent them out in the off-season, if somebody asks nicely. Does it? It does. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked out the open door at the water, which was gray and choppy and unkind. And then he looked back at her, and a small smile moved across his face and was gone. Are you asking nicely? He said. I think so. Then yes, I'll rent you a kayak. Not today, though. He nodded out at the water. Today you'd capsize in 10 minutes, and I'd have to come get you, and I'm too old to be pulling people out of the Sound in November. Tomorrow? Forecast looks decent Tuesday afternoon. If it holds, I'll come get you around 2. If it doesn't, we'll try the next clear day. She nodded. She turned to go. The floor of the boatworks was uneven. Old planks warped with 70 years of damp. Her boot caught on a raised edge. She pitched forward, and his hand was on her elbow before she had even understood she was falling. It was the briefest possible touch. His palm, the inside of her elbow, through the wool of her coat. He steadied her, and he let go, and he said, "Careful, that board's a bastard. I keep meaning to." And he was already turning back to his work. Eleanor walked back to the cottage with her left arm held very slightly out from her side, as if she were carrying something fragile. She did not understand, until she was almost home, what she was carrying. The memory of being touched. The Tuesday window came. He picked her up at the cottage in a green pickup truck that was old enough to have been her father's, with a kayak strapped in the bed and a thermos of something hot wedged into the cup holder. He had said, on the phone the night before, to wear what she'd wear hiking, plus one more layer. She had worn what she'd wear hiking, plus two. He looked her over when she came down the porch steps and gave a small nod, as if approving the second layer, without comment. And she felt, ridiculously, at 61, that she had passed a small test she hadn't known she was taking. The water was glass. He took her to a small protected cove on the south side of the headland, where the bay folded in on itself and the wind couldn't find the surface. The kayak was a long, stable double. He sat in the back. She sat in the front. He gave her exactly enough instruction to not feel foolish, and then said, "You'll figure the rest out. You've got good shoulders." And that was the most direct compliment a man had paid her body in a decade and a half. She didn't know what to do with it. She paddled. They didn't talk much on the water. He pointed out things, a harbor seal that came up to look at them, a stand of cormorants on a rock, the small white shape of a fishing boat way out past the headland. And she made small sounds of acknowledgement, and the rhythm of paddling settled into her shoulders. And at some point, she realized she had stopped thinking about anything at all. She was just here, in a boat, with a man she had known when she was 19, watching the late November light turn the water the color of pewter and old silver. It had been a long time since she had been somewhere without also being somewhere else in her head. He paddled them to a small beach on the far side of the cove. They pulled up on the gravel, and he handed her the thermos. "Coffee," he said. "There's a little brandy in it. I should have asked." "You should not have asked." She took the thermos. "Thank you." They sat on a piece of driftwood. The light was already starting to soften toward late afternoon. She drank the coffee, there was more than a little brandy in it, and felt it warm her from the inside out. And she was aware of him sitting next to her, not touching her, his thigh maybe 6 inches from hers. And she thought, I could move my leg 6 inches and touch him. And she did not move her leg. He didn't say anything. He drank his coffee. He looked at the water. She had been bracing the whole paddle out for him to ask about her life, about what she was doing here, about what any of this was. He hadn't. He had handed her a thermos and pointed out a seal and said her shoulders were good. And now he was sitting next to her, drinking coffee and watching the light go. And the silence between them was not waiting for her to fill it. The silence was just the silence. She had forgotten that silence could be like that. "I never married," he said. He said it the way a man comments on the weather, not as an opening, just as a fact he was offering her, in case it was useful. "Almost did, in my 30s. It didn't take. After that, I stopped trying." She nodded. She did not say anything for a long time. "My husband died 18 months ago," she said. Hank turned his head slowly. He looked at her for a moment. "I'm sorry, Ellie." "Thank you." She turned the thermos cap in her hands. The gull she'd been watching had moved on down the beach. She watched the place where it had been. "He was a good man," she said. "I want you to know that. He was kind, and he was funny in his way, and he was a good father, and he loved me. He really loved me." Okay. She didn't know why she was still talking. She didn't know why she had started. Something had opened, on the water maybe, or earlier in the truck, or 4 days ago at the counter when he'd handed her a cortado without making a thing of it. I just don't know if he ever... I don't know how to say this. I've never said it. You don't have to say it. No, I want to. I want to say it once. He didn't answer. He just waited. He was good at waiting. "I think he loved me," she said. "But I don't know if he ever really knew me. I think somewhere in the first 10 years, I think I stopped saying things out loud. I think I started to make myself smaller because it was easier, and then I kept making myself smaller. And after a while, I forgot I was doing it. And after a while, there wasn't very much of me left to know. And he loved who was left. I think he really did. But I don't know if he loved me, because I'm not sure I was there to be loved. And I don't know if that's his fault or mine or just what happens to people over 40 years. She stopped. She had not said any of that out loud, ever, to anyone. She had not said it to her children. She had not said it to her sister. She had not even said it to her therapist. She had barely said it to herself in the kitchen at 3 a.m, in the months when she had been waking up at 3 a.m. She had said it to Hank Holloway in 15 seconds, on a piece of driftwood, with a thermos of coffee and brandy going cold in her hands. She did not look at him. He didn't move. He didn't reach for her. He didn't make any of the small, horrible sounds, "Oh, Ellie, I'm so sorry, that's awful," that she had been bracing for without knowing she was bracing for them. He sat there next to her, and he looked out at the water with her. And after a long time, he said, very quietly, "Okay. Okay? Okay. I heard you." She put her face in her hands. She did not cry. She came close. She sat there with her face in her hands and her elbows on her knees and her breath shaking a little. And he did not touch her, and he did not move, and he did not fill the silence. And after a while, she had no idea how long, she lifted her head and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and said, "I don't know why I just told you that." "I do." "Why?" "Because you wanted to say it. And because I'm not anybody's husband or anybody's kid. So it doesn't cost you anything to say it to me." That's not the only reason." "No," he said. "Probably not." He held out his hand, not to touch her, to take the thermos back. She handed it to him. He poured a little more of the coffee into the cap, and he handed it back. "Drink that, you're cold." She drank it. They paddled back to the boat ramp in a silence that was not at all uncomfortable. He loaded the kayak back into the truck. He drove her home. At the gate of the cottage, he put the truck in park and didn't get out. He just sat there, with the engine running. "Thank you," she said, "for today." "You're welcome." She put her hand on the door handle. She did not open it. "Hank?" "Yeah?" I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I want you to know that." "I know. I don't want to be unfair to you." He looked at her across the cab of the truck in the failing light, and he said, "Ellie, I have known you since I was 19 years old. I am not in a hurry. She got out of the truck. She walked up the porch steps. She heard the truck pull away behind her, slow on the gravel. And she stood on the porch in the cold with her hand on the door, and she did not go inside for a long time. Inside her own chest, something she had thought was dead for a long time had started to move. His daughter Claire called 5 days later, on the following Sunday. Eleanor was on the porch when the phone rang, in the watery late morning light, with a coffee going cold beside her and a book open on her lap that she had not been reading. She had been thinking instead about the truck, about sitting in the cab of the truck on Tuesday with the engine running and the light failing, about what he had said, that he was not in a hurry. She had been thinking about it the way you think about a bruise you keep pressing on to make sure it still hurts. Only the surprise of it was that this one didn't hurt. It just was. A warm, small fact in the middle of her chest. The phone said Claire. She picked up. "Hi, honey." "Mom, hi. I'm sorry. Is it a bad time?" "It's never a bad time, sweetheart." Okay. A small pause. The sound of Claire moving around her kitchen. Eleanor could hear faintly the dishwasher running. "How are you? How's the cottage? Are you eating?" "I'm eating. My friend Margaret keeps bringing me bread." Good. Another pause. "Mom, Aunt Sue called me." Eleanor frowned. Aunt Sue lived in Portland, and they spoke maybe twice a year, on holidays and Bill's birthday. There was no reason for her to be calling Claire. What did Aunt Sue say? She said that someone told her you were spending time with somebody, a man. Claire's voice had the careful flatness of a person trying very hard not to sound like she was accusing anyone of anything. "And I told her I'm sure that's not what it is. I told her you went out there to clear your head and that's all this is. And I'm asking, Mom, is there something I should know?" Eleanor watched a cormorant draw a slow black line across the gray of the bay. "I knew him a long time ago, Claire, before I met your dad. He still lives here. I've seen him a few times." The silence on the line went very still. "Okay," Claire said. Sweetheart, it's not anything." She said it before she knew she was going to. She said it the way you say, "I'm fine," when somebody asks how you are at the grocery store. It came from a deeper, older place than the conversation. From 40 years of small, placating sentences. From the slow habit of making the people who loved her comfortable. She heard herself say it, and she heard who had said it, and her stomach turned over. "Okay," Claire said again. "Okay, Mom, you're 18 months out, you know? You're in a different place than you think you are. And I don't know this person, and Aunt Sue doesn't know this person, and you haven't known this person for 40 years. And I want you to be careful with yourself, okay? You haven't been alone in a long time, and I think it would be very easy right now to confuse some things." "Claire, I'm not saying anything bad about him, Mom. I don't know him. I'm saying I love you, and Dad just died, and you sound different on the phone. And I don't want you to make a decision you can't take back because you're lonely. That's all. That's all I'm saying." Eleanor sat very still on the porch. She could feel, very clearly, two separate things happening at once. One was that her daughter was being a good daughter, was being protective, in the careful, slightly clumsy way that adult children are protective of newly widowed mothers, and was doing it out of love, and was not wrong about the surface facts of any of it. The other was that her daughter did not know who she was talking to. Claire was talking to the mother she had grown up with, the calm, capable, contented wife of a good man, the woman who had been happy, who had been fine, who had spent 40 years making the people she loved comfortable by performing a marriage that had been quietly emptying her out. And Eleanor did not know how to tell her daughter that the woman Claire was worried about protecting was not the woman sitting on the porch. She did not know how to tell Claire that the version of her that her daughter was trying to protect was the version of her that the man down the road had seen through in an afternoon. She did not know how to tell her any of it. She had never told her any of it. "I'll be careful, honey," she said. "Okay. Thank you, Mom. I love you. I love you too. I'll call you Wednesday." She hung up. She sat on the porch for a long time. The coffee had gone all the way cold. The cormorant was gone. After a while, she went inside and stood in the kitchen. The bread was still on the counter from Friday, hardening. She looked at it. And then she looked at the second mug she had set out 3 weeks ago and put right back down. And she walked over to the wood stove, and she sat on the floor in front of it with her back against the wall. And she did not cry. She just sat there. She did not see Hank on Monday. She had been going to the coffee shop most mornings. She did not go. She walked instead down to the beach on the north side of the headland, away from town, where the wind was sharper and there was nobody to see her not crying. She stayed out for 3 hours. She came back to the cottage with her face raw from the wind, and she put the kettle on, and she did not light the wood stove, because she did not feel that she deserved it warm. She did not call him. He did not call her. She had no reason to think he would have. They had not made a plan. He was, after all, not in a hurry. She told herself this was a kindness she was doing him. On Tuesday afternoon, he came to the cottage. She heard the truck before she saw it. She had been at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of soup and a paperback open in front of her that she had not read 3 pages of. And the sound of the truck pulled into the gravel drive and stopped, and she sat very still at the table. And after a long moment, she heard the truck door open and close, and then his boots on the porch. He knocked once. She opened the door. He looked at her. He took her in. The unwashed hair, the cardigan she had been wearing for 3 days, the small, swollen place under her eyes. His face settled, but more slowly this time, and more carefully. "Hi," he said. "Hi. You weren't at the shop." "No. Are you okay?" I don't know. Can I come in?" She stepped back from the door. He came in. He took his boots off in the entryway, even though they weren't muddy. She had forgotten he did that. He walked into the kitchen and looked at the cold soup and the unread book and the unlit stove. And he didn't say anything about any of it. He just went over to the wood stove and crouched down and opened the front and laid a small fire and lit it on the first match. Then he stood up and came back to the table and sat down across from her. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him. She told him about Claire's call. She told him about Aunt Sue. She told him, haltingly, that her daughter did not know who she was. That Claire had spent her whole life thinking her mother had been happy, because Eleanor had spent her whole life making sure Claire would think so. She told him that she did not know how to be the kind of woman who said the true thing to her own child. She told him that she did not know how to do this, whatever this was, between him and her, without first doing a thing she did not know how to do. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not reach for her hand. When she was done, he said, "Okay, okay, okay, I heard you." She laughed, a small, wet sound, almost a sob. "I have to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to hear me say it, and then I want you to not answer for a little while. I'm going to go home after I say it, all right?" "All right." "I have been alone a long time, Ellie. I have been alone in a way where I made peace with it. I was not waiting for you. I want you to know that. I built a life that was a real life, and I would have been all right if you had never come back. That is the truest thing I can tell you." He paused. "But you came back." He looked at her across the kitchen table. The fire he had just lit was beginning to find the larger wood. The kitchen was getting warm. "I am not going to ask you for anything," he said. "I am not going to make you choose between me and your daughter, or between me and the life you go back to, or between me and any version of yourself. I am not going to be one more thing you have to manage. If you decide that the cost of this is too high for you, I want you to know I will understand. I will understand it. I will not be angry." He stood up. "But I am not going to lie to you and tell you that I don't care. Because I do. I want you to be here." He put on his boots. He went to the door. At the door, with his hand on the knob, he turned and said, "Take your time. You know where I am." He left. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, in the warm kitchen, with the fire he had laid burning quietly in the stove behind her. She put her face in her hands. This time, she cried. That night, she slept badly. She woke before dawn with the kind of clarity that arrives uninvited at 4 a.m. and presents itself as truth, the kind you can't tell until later whether to trust. She lay in the bed Margaret had made up for her and watched the ceiling go from black to gray, and the fire in the stove had gone out hours ago, and the cottage was cold. And she thought, I have been afraid of this exact thing my whole life. She thought it the way you think the answer to a question you didn't know you had been asking. She thought it calmly, almost dispassionately. She had been afraid of being known. Not by Hank. Hank was almost incidental in this clarity. She had been afraid of being known by anyone. She had been afraid of taking up the room a fully said-out-loud woman takes up. She had been afraid of being a person whose feelings inconvenienced the people who loved her. She had spent 40 years performing a smaller version of herself for a man who would, almost certainly, have loved the larger one. She would never know now. She could not ask him. And for the 18 months since he died, she had been performing a still smaller version of herself for her daughter, who had been performing back. The two of them had been performing at each other across a kitchen island in Portland for a year and a half. Calling it grief. The thing Claire had been protecting her from was not Hank. The thing Claire had been protecting her from was the woman who would say things out loud. Eleanor sat up in the bed. She pulled the quilt around her shoulders. She walked through the dark cottage to the kitchen and put the kettle on. And while it heated, she stood at the window and watched the sky begin to gray out over the water. And she thought, with the same uninvited clarity, I am not going to do this anymore. She made the tea. She drank it standing up. She watched the gulls find the morning. At 7 o'clock, she picked up the phone and she called her daughter. She did not say all of it. She knew, even as she dialed, that she was not going to be able to say all of it. 40 years was not going to fit into a phone call. But she said some of it. She said that she had been lonely inside her marriage for a long time. She said that she had loved Bill, and that he had loved her, and that both of those things were true. And so was the other thing. She said that the version of her daughter's mother, who had been on the phone on Sunday, the calm, careful, "I'll be careful, honey," mother, was a version of herself she had been performing for so long that she had stopped knowing she was performing it, and that she was not going to perform it anymore, even if it meant being a stranger to her own child for a little while. Claire was very quiet. When Eleanor was done, when she had said as much of it as she could say at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, sitting at a kitchen table on the Oregon coast in a quilt with a cold cup of tea in front of her, Claire said, "Mom?" "Yes?" I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything with it, sweetheart. You just have to know it." "Are you okay?" Eleanor thought about that. "I think I'm starting to be," she said. Claire cried a little. Eleanor did not. They talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing much, the way you talk after something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Before she hung up, Claire said, "Mom, about him, about Hank. I don't know him, and I'm still worried a little. I'm going to need some time, but I'm glad you told me." "Okay, honey. I love you. I love you too." She hung up. She got dressed. She put on the warmer of her 2 coats. She walked into town. The bell over the coffee shop door chimed. He looked up from the espresso machine. His face did not settle this time. His face did something else. A small, careful waiting. The look of a man who had not let himself hope for anything in particular and was not going to start now. She walked to the counter. "Can I sit down with you?" she said. "For a little while?" "Yes." He came around from behind the counter. He flipped the small wooden sign on the door from "open" to "back shortly." He poured 2 cortados. He carried them to the small table by the window. And he sat down across from her, and he set hers in front of her, and he waited. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "I called Claire this morning," she said. "I told her some of it, not all of it. I'm going to have to keep telling her, I think, for a while. It's not going to be one phone call." "Okay. And I don't know what I'm doing, Hank. I want you to know that. I don't know if I'm going to stay here past the month. I don't know if I'm going to sell my house in Portland. I don't know if I'm going to be a person who is good at this. I have been bad at this for a long time. Okay? I don't want you to wait for me to be sure." "Ellie." "What?" "I'm not asking you to be sure." She looked at him. The light was coming through the window behind him, the cold, gray morning light off the water, and it made the gray in his hair look like a kind of weather. And she said, "What are you asking me, then?" He thought about it. He turned the cup in his hands. He said, "I'm asking you to keep coming in, for coffee, while you figure it out. I'm asking you to come down to the boatworks on the days I'm there. I'm asking you to let me take you out on the water again when the weather's right. I'm asking you to sit on my porch some evenings, if you want to. I'm asking you to tell me the things you didn't get to tell your husband, if you want to tell them. And I am asking you, if you decide to go back to Portland at the end of the month, to come back, in the spring, or the summer, or whenever you can, and to keep coming back, for as long as you want to keep coming back. He paused. That's what I'm asking. She put her hand on the table, palm up, slowly, the way you would put down something you had been carrying a long time. He put his hand over hers, on the table, in the empty coffee shop, with the cortados going cool between them. Okay, she said. Okay? Okay. I heard you. He laughed. He laughed, and his eyes went a little wet, and he didn't try to hide that they had. And he said, "All right then, Ellie." And he didn't let go of her hand. She stayed past the month. She did not sell the house in Portland, not that year. She drove down once a month, sometimes twice, and she had dinner with Claire, and they talked. And the talking got easier, slowly, and then for a while got harder, and then got easier again. Claire came up to the coast in March. She met Hank. She did not love him right away, and she did not have to. She loved her mother, and her mother was, she could see, a woman she had not exactly met before, and she was learning how. In the cottage on the bluff, on the nights when the wind came in off the water, Eleanor lit the fire in the stove, and Hank packed the back vent half with newspaper. And they sat on the small couch together, with a blanket over their knees, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't. And the silence between them was the silence she had forgotten was possible. One night in late spring, with the windows open and the smell of the sea coming in and a glass of wine going warm in her hand, she said to him, "I thought this part of me was dead, Hank. For a long time. I really did." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I know." And then, after a longer while, with his hand resting heavy and warm on her knee under the blanket, it wasn't. She closed her eyes. It was better than she had expected. It was so much better than she had expected.